What happens when Hollywood's most unpredictable actor sits down with The View's most confrontational host? You're about to witness one of the most explosive celebrity interviews ever recorded, where Nicolas Cage's passion for his craft collides head-on with Whoopi Goldberg's relentless interrogation. This isn't your typical promotional appearance gone wrong. This is a masterclass in how one person's agenda can completely derail what should have been a simple conversation about movies. Before we dive into this incredible confrontation, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us about the most awkward interview you've ever seen, because trust me, this one takes the cake. The tension was palpable from the moment Nicolas Cage walked onto the View set. He come to promote his latest film, expecting the usual softball questions about his career and upcoming projects. Instead, he found himself sitting across from Whoopi Goldberg, who had clearly done her homework, but not in the way you'd expect from a professional interviewer. "Nicholas, welcome to The View," Whoopi began, her tone already carrying an edge that made the other co-hosts shift uncomfortably in their seats. "I have to ask you something that's been bothering me for years. Your acting choices, they're pretty wild, aren't they?" Cage, initially taken aback by the blunt opening, maintained his composure. "Well, Whoopi, I believe in taking risks as an actor. I don't want to play it safe because that's not what art is about." "Art?" Whoopi interrupted, raising an eyebrow. Is that what we're calling it? Because I've seen some of your recent movies and I'm not sure what I was watching, but it didn't feel like art to me." The studio audience fell silent. This wasn't the lighthearted banter they'd come to expect from celebrity interviews on daytime television. Even the camera operator seemed to sense something was off, zooming in closer to catch every micro-expression on both faces. "I'm sorry, what exactly are you trying to say?" Cage asked, his voice remaining steady, but his eyes narrowing slightly. "I'm saying that maybe, just maybe, you've been phoning it in for the past decade." Whoopi shot back, leaning forward in her chair. "Face off, Con Air. Those were movies. But this recent stuff, it feels like you're just cashing checks." The other co-hosts, Joy Behar and Sarah Haynes, exchanged nervous glances. This was supposed to be a promotional interview for Cage's new thriller, not a public execution of his career choices. "Whoopi, I think there might be some misunderstanding here," Cage said, his hands beginning to gesture more animatedly. "Every role I take, I put my heart and soul into it. I don't just show up and collect a paycheck." "Really?" Whoopi's voice dripped with skepticism. "Because that's not what I heard from some people in the industry. Word is you take any role that pays well enough to cover your debts." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Cage's face flushed red, and for a moment the legendary actor seemed genuinely speechless. The cameras captured every second of his internal struggle to maintain professionalism in the face of such a personal attack. "That's incredibly unprofessional," Cage finally managed, his voice tight with controlled anger. "You invite me here under the pretense of promoting my film, and instead you ambush me with tabloid gossip." "I'm asking legitimate questions," Whoopi replied, completely unmoved by his obvious distress. "Your financial troubles have been well documented. You've admitted yourself that you had to take roles you might not have otherwise considered. Taking roles to pay bills doesn't mean I don't give everything to those performances," Cage countered, his legendary intensity beginning to surface. "Every actor in Hollywood has had to make practical choices. That doesn't diminish the craft. But it does diminish the product, doesn't it?" Whoopi pressed on, seemingly oblivious to the uncomfortable silence from her co-hosts. "When you're just going through the motions because you need the money, the audience can tell." Joy Behar finally attempted to intervene. "Maybe we should talk about the new movie. It looks really exciting." "And no, let's stay on this topic," Whoopi cut her off sharply. "I think Nicholas can handle a little honest conversation about his career choices, unless I'm wrong." The challenge was clear and Cage's jaw tightened visibly. "I can handle honest conversation, Whoopi. What I can't handle is disrespect disguised as journalism." "Disrespect?" Whoopi laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "I'm being honest about what I see. You used to be an actor who took risks, who chose interesting projects. Now you're in movies that go straight to streaming platforms that nobody's ever heard of. Those platforms give filmmakers creative freedom that major studios often don't allow. Cage replied, his voice rising slightly. Just because something doesn't have a $200 million budget doesn't mean it lacks artistic merit. Artistic merit? Whoopi's tone became even more condescending. Is that what you call those action movies where you play essentially the same character over and over again? The grizzled guy with a mysterious past who has to save someone. The personal nature of the attack was becoming increasingly clear to everyone in the studio. This wasn't about legitimate criticism of his work. This was about tearing down someone who couldn't really fight back in this format. I bring something different to every role, Cage insisted, his hands now moving expressively as his passion for his craft took over. Whether it's a small independent film or a larger production, I approach each character with the same dedication. Dedication? Whoopi scoffed, or desperation? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you'll take any role that comes your way, regardless of the script quality. The studio audience was now visibly uncomfortable. Some people whispering to each other, others looking around as if hoping someone would intervene. This had gone way beyond typical celebrity interview territory. You know what, Whoopi? Cage said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. I came here to talk about my work, not to be lectured by someone who clearly has an agenda. My agenda is honesty, Whoopi replied coolly. Something that seems to be in short supply in Hollywood these days. Your agenda is humiliation. Cage shot back, his composure finally beginning to crack. You're using your platform to take shots at me for reasons I can't even begin to understand. Humiliation, Whoopi's voice rose with mock indignation. I'm asking you about your career, Nicholas. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. The other co-hosts looked like they wanted to disappear into their chairs. Sarah Haynes nervously shuffled her papers while Joy Behar kept opening her mouth as if to speak, then thinking better of it. The tension in the studio was so thick you could cut it with a knife. There's a difference between asking about my career and attacking my character, Cage replied, his voice gaining strength. You're questioning my integrity as an artist, and frankly, I don't think you're qualified to make that judgment. Not qualified? Whoopi's eyes flashed with anger. I've been in this business longer than you have, and I've seen plenty of actors compromise their standards for a paycheck. You're not special, Nicholas. I never said I was special, Cage responded, his hands now gesturing more emphatically. But I also won't sit here and let you tear apart my life's work based on your personal opinions disguised as facts, personal opinions. Whoopi laughed harshly. Box office numbers don't lie. Critical reviews don't lie. Your recent track record speaks for itself. My recent track record includes films that have found audiences around the world, Cage countered, his passion for his craft evident in every word. Just because they don't fit your narrow definition of success doesn't mean they lack value. Value, Whoopi's tone became increasingly mocking. What value is there in making the same generic action movie over and over again? Where's the Nicolas Cage who gave us Leaving Las Vegas? Where's the actor who actually challenged himself? The mention of his Oscar-winning performance seemed to strike a nerve. Cage's jaw clenched, and for a moment his legendary intensity was on full display. That actor is still here, he said quietly, but with unmistakable force. He's been here through every single performance, even in films that people like you dismiss without actually watching them. Oh, I've watched them, Whoopi replied smugly. And let me tell you, it's painful to see someone with your talent settling for mediocrity. Mediocrity? Cage's voice cracked slightly. You think I'm settling for mediocrity? You think I wake up every morning and consciously choose to do less than my best? The raw emotion in his voice was palpable, and even some of the crew members were looking uncomfortable. This had moved far beyond professional criticism into something deeply personal. I think you've gotten comfortable, Whoopi pressed on, seemingly energized by getting such a reaction. I think you've forgotten what it means to really push yourself as an actor. You have no idea what you're talking about, Cage replied, his hands now shaking slightly with contained emotion. Every role I take, I dive deep into that character. I research, I prepare, I give everything I have for a straight-to-streaming action movie. Whoopi's skepticism was palpable. Come on, Nicholas. How much preparation does it take to play angry guy? With a gun? The dismissive characterization of his work was clearly the last straw. Cage's face went through a series of expressions from hurt to anger to something approaching disbelief. That's exactly the kind of ignorant comment I'd expect from someone who judges art based on marketing budgets, he said, his voice growing stronger. You think because a film doesn't get a wide theatrical release, it's automatically beneath consideration. I think when you're phoning it in, it shows. Whoopi shot back without hesitation. And lately, that's all I've been seeing from you, phoning it in. Cage stood up slightly in his chair, his entire body language shifting to something more confrontational. You want to see phoning it in? Look at half the performances on network television. Look at actors who show up, read their lines, and collect their checks. Are you saying I phone it in? Whoopi's voice became dangerously quiet. I'm saying you're throwing stones from a glass house. Cage replied, meeting her gaze directly. You want to talk about artistic integrity? Let's talk about using your platform to ambush guests instead of having honest conversations. The studio fell completely silent. Even the cameras seemed to stop. Their usual subtle movements. This had crossed a line that nobody expected. Ambush. Whoopi's voice was ice cold now. I'm asking you about your career. If you can't handle that, maybe you should stick to those small movies where nobody asks hard questions. Hard questions. Cage's voice rose again. These aren't hard questions, Whoopi. These are calculated attacks. You're not a journalist right now. You're a bully with a microphone. The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Joy Behar finally found her voice, attempting to salvage what was left of the interview. Maybe we should take a quick break, she suggested weakly. But both. Cage and Whoopi ignored her completely. A bully? Whoopi's voice dripped with sarcasm. Because I'm asking you to explain your career choices. Because I'm not kissing your feet like every other interviewer? Because you're not asking questions? You're making accusations? Cage replied, his voice now carrying the full weight of his frustration. There's a difference between journalism and character assassination. Character assassination? Whoopi laughed. But it was a cold, bitter sound. Your character is what put you in this position, Nicholas? Nobody forced you to make those choices. What position? Cage demanded, his hands gesturing wildly now. The position of being a working actor who's passionate about his craft. The position of taking risks that other actors won't take. The position of being a once great actor who's now a punchline, Whoopi said with brutal directness. The words hit like a physical blow. Cage's face went through a rapid series of emotions, shock, hurt, and finally a cold anger that anyone who knew his work would recognize. A punchline, he repeated slowly, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout could have. That's what you've become, Whoopi continued, apparently oblivious to the danger signs. People don't go to Nicolas Cage movies to see great acting anymore. They go to see what weird thing you'll do next. Weird thing. Cage's voice was still quiet, but his entire body was tense with barely contained emotion. You think my commitment to bringing authenticity to every role is weird? I think your commitment to overacting in every role is weird. Whoopi replied without missing a beat. And I think you know it, which is why you're getting so defensive. The personal nature of the attack was now undeniable. This wasn't about his movies anymore. This was about attacking him as a person, as an artist, as someone who had devoted his life to his craft. Defensive? Cage's voice finally began to rise again. I'm not being defensive, Whoopi. I'm being honest about what I see happening here. And what do you see happening? Whoopi challenged, leaning forward in her chair. I see someone using their platform to tear down a guest for their own entertainment. Cage replied, his voice gaining momentum. I see someone who's forgotten what it means to have a respectful conversation. Respectful? Whoopi's eyebrows shot up. You want respect? Earn it. Make movies that deserve respect. The final insult was delivered with such casual cruelty that even the other co-hosts visibly flinched. Cage stared at her for a long moment, his chest rising and falling with controlled breathing. "You know what, Whoopi?" Cage said, his voice suddenly calm in a way that made everyone in the studio hold their breath. "I've spent 30 years in this business, and I've never encountered someone so determined to be cruel for the sake of being cruel." "Cruel?" Whoopi's voice remained defiant. "I'm being honest. If you can't handle honesty, maybe you should reconsider your career choices." "Honest?" Cage stood up from his chair, his full height now commanding the attention of every person in the studio. "There's nothing honest about what you're doing here. This isn't journalism. This isn't even good television. This is just mean." The other co-hosts looked like they were witnessing a car accident in slow motion. Sarah Haynes had stopped pretending to look at her notes while Joy Behar was staring at Whoopi with something approaching horror. "Mean, Luffy." But for the first time there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "I'm asking you about your work, Nicholas. If you can't discuss your work without getting emotional, maybe that tells us something." "It tells us that I care about my work," Cage replied, his voice gaining strength with each word. "It tells us that I pour my heart into every single role, even when people like you have already decided to dismiss it before the cameras roll." "Heart?" Whoopi's tone remained mocking, but some of her earlier confidence was wavering. "Is that what you call it when you're clearly just going through the motions? Cage's voice cracked with emotion. "Do you have any idea what it's like to be passionate about something, to dedicate your entire life to it, only to have people tear it down without even trying to understand it?" The raw vulnerability in his voice was impossible to ignore. Even the camera operators seemed to be holding their breath, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. "I understand perfectly," Whoopi replied, but her voice lacked the earlier venom. "I understand that you used to be a great actor and now you're not." "Used to be?" Cage's hands began to shake with controlled emotion. "I'm still that actor, Whoopi. I'm still the same person who puts everything into every performance. The only difference is that now I have people like you telling me that my passion is somehow fake." "Your passion isn't fake," Whoopi said, her tone shifting slightly. "Your choices are questionable." "My choices?" Cage's voice rose again, his legendary intensity now fully unleashed. "My choices are to keep working, to keep creating, to keep pushing boundaries, even when critics have already made up their minds." "How is that questionable?" "Because you're better than the material you're choosing," Whoopi replied. And for a moment, it almost sounded like she might be trying to backtrack. "Better than the material?" Cage's voice was incredulous. "You haven't even seen most of these films. You're judging them based on budgets and marketing campaigns. You're dismissing the work of dozens of talented filmmakers because their movies don't fit your narrow definition of important." "I'm judging them based on quality," Whoopi insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. "Quality?" Cage's voice became dangerously quiet again. "You want to talk about quality? Let's talk about the quality of this interview. Let's talk about the quality of ambushing a guest who came here in good faith." The accusation hung in the air, and for the first time, Whoopi seemed to be struggling for a response. The other co-hosts were practically invisible in their chairs, clearly wishing they could be anywhere else. "I'm not ambushing anyone," Whoopi said finally, but her voice was defensive now. "I'm asking legitimate questions about your career trajectory." "Legitimate questions?" Cage's voice was building to something explosive. "You called me a punchline, Whoopi. You said I was phoning it in. You questioned my integrity as an artist. Those aren't questions. Those are attacks." "They're observations," Whoopi replied weakly. "They're insults." Cage shot back immediately. "And what's worse, they're insults based on ignorance. You're attacking work you haven't bothered to understand?" "I understand enough," Whoopi said, trying to regain her earlier confidence. "No, you don't," Cage replied, his voice now carrying the full weight of his frustration and hurt. "You understand box office numbers and critical consensus. You don't understand the craft. You don't understand what it means to disappear into a character regardless of the size of the production. I understand that you used to choose better projects, Whoopi said, making one last attempt to maintain her position. Used to? Cage's voice cracked with emotion. I'm still choosing projects that challenge me. The difference is that now I'm working with filmmakers who might not have studio backing but have incredible vision and passion. Passion doesn't always translate to good movies, Whoopi replied, her voice now noticeably quieter. And studio backing doesn't always translate to good movies either, Cage countered. But you're only willing to acknowledge one of those truths. The logic was undeniable, and Whoopi's silence stretched uncomfortably long. The studio audience was completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something historic. Look, Cage, said his voice becoming more controlled, but no less intense. I came here to talk about my work, to share my passion for storytelling with your audience. Instead, I've been subjected to a 20-minute character assassination. It wasn't character assassination, Whoopi said, but her voice lacked any real conviction. It was exactly that, Cage replied firmly. And the worst part is that you did it under the guise of journalism. You used your platform to tear down someone who couldn't really fight back in this format. You seem to be fighting back just fine, Whoopi said, attempting a weak smile. I'm defending my life's work, Cage replied, his voice deadly serious. There's a difference between fighting back and refusing to be bullied. The word bullied seemed to hit Whoopi like a physical blow. For the first time in the entire interview, she looked genuinely uncomfortable with the direction things had taken. I wasn't bullying anyone, she said quietly. You were, Cage replied without hesitation. You were using your power as a host to attack a guest who came here in good faith. That's the definition of bullying. The accusation was delivered with such quiet intensity that it was impossible to dismiss. Even the other co-hosts were nodding slightly, clearly agreeing with his assessment. I think we should move on, Joy Behar said desperately, trying to salvage what was left of the interview. No, Cage said firmly, his eyes never leaving Whoopi's face. I think we should address what just happened here. I think we should acknowledge that this crossed a line. What line? Whoopi asked, but her voice was barely above a whisper. The line between professional criticism and personal attack, Cage replied. The line between honest conversation and deliberate humiliation. The words hung in the air like a final judgment. Whoopi stared at him for a long moment, clearly struggling with how to respond. I was just being honest about what I see, she said finally, her voice now completely lacking. The earlier aggression. No, Cage said, standing up and beginning to remove his microphone. You are being cruel, and I won't sit here and enable that kind of behavior. Where are you going? Whoopi asked, panic creeping into her voice as she realized what was happening. I'm leaving, Cage replied simply, his hands working to untangle the microphone wire. I'm not going to participate in this anymore. You can't just leave, Whoopi said, her voice rising with desperation. I can and I am, Cage replied, his voice calm, but final. I came here to promote my work, not to be your verbal punching bag. The studio erupted in chaos as producers rushed onto the set, trying to convince Cage to stay, but his mind was clearly made up. He handed his microphone to a producer and looked directly at Whoopi one last time. You had a chance to have a real conversation about art, about passion, about the craft of acting, he said quietly. Instead, you chose to be cruel for entertainment. That says everything about you and nothing about me? With that, Nicolas Cage walked off the view set, leaving behind a stunned studio audience, and a host who, for once in her career, was completely speechless. The cameras kept rolling as Whoopi sat in her chair, staring at the empty seat where one of Hollywood's most dedicated actors had just delivered a masterclass in dignity under attack. The silence in the studio was deafening, broken only by the sound of Cage's footsteps echoing down the hallway. And there you have it, one of the most explosive celebrity interviews ever recorded, where Nicolas Cage's passion for his craft collided with someone who seemed determined to tear him down for sport. What did you think of Cage's response? Did he handle it the right way, or should he have stayed and continued the fight? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more incredible celebrity moments that you won't see anywhere else. What's the most unprofessional interview moment you've ever witnessed?